Hi, everybody. It's Nico Bernie Miller, and today we're having our next session on growing happily. Oh my gosh, the year is almost over. Thank you so much for joining us. We've just in the sprint to finish up 2025. Today's session, I am joined by an award winning attorney, Cami Hoskins of Spencer Fane. The reason why I wanted to have Cami join me to have today's conversation is because a lot of us business owners may not always invest in legal advice as much as we could or maybe even should. You might be thinking, oh, I have a lawyer or I know somebody, or maybe I get advice from Google when I search. I have an AI tool. I use ChatGPT, you name it. Everyone has a strategy. But as you know, laws change, regulations get updated, there are new requirements, there are different, policies, things to comply with. There's your contracts, there's your work orders, there's a lot of different things of what makes working with a business attorney extremely valuable and actually more cost effective than waiting until you have an issue. So, on today's Growing Happily, we're going to talk about the business case for getting a business attorney before you actually need one. Thank you for joining me on Growing Happily. Hey guys, hey Cammy, how you doing?
Hey, doing well. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm awesome. It's close. It's December Eve.
Yes,
It's a
holidays
great
are
time of
near.
year. Yes, I love the thanks to get ready to give thanks, the holidays, everything. So I've got three really strategic questions that I'm going to ask you and that I would love for you to answer. And it'll be very conversational for our audience. But the main goal is to really understand what is the value of working with a business attorney now, to get an attorney on retainer, to have that relationship established, and to meet with your attorney regularly, once a year, twice a year, once a quarter. It depends on how your business is changing. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. So first, Cami, if you would be so kind, would you tell everyone about your background and the kind of attorney that you are?
Certainly. And first of all, thank you so much for having me, Nico. This is a very exciting opportunity to connect with you and to with all the folks in the audience who are hardworking entrepreneurs, who are some of my favorite folks. So, like you said, I'm an attorney at the law firm Spencer Fane, and my primary practice area is labor and employment. So, I advise employers around issues relating to their employees. And I think another important thing about me is that I was raised by an entrepreneur. So when I was a kid, my dad had his own publishing business for healthcare manuals and books. And I remember like summers spent at his office watching him sort of go through the processes of the challenges related to having his own business. And I remember listening to cool jazz and helping him print things and box things and just all the things. And so I think I have a special place in my heart for small business owners and for entrepreneurs for that reason.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, let's dive in. So, first question, and this when I first met you, this was also a question for me because when I met you, I had a matter, I had a legal issue, and I needed some help. And the legal support that I was getting, I had somebody who was out of state, and I didn't really have, really a great local attorney. And honestly, you transformed my perspective about working with an attorney, and you have taught me so much and advised me. I honestly, conversations that you and I have had over these years that we've worked together and known each other have really affected how I make business decisions, and it's all been to my benefit. So, my first question: there are a lot of ways that an attorney can help a small business owner, but what are three types of proactive discussions, right? Three types of conversations that will give a small business owner the greatest value in the least amount of time. So, what do you think?
Well, first, it's a privilege to have supported you on your journey. And I think, an ideal relationship with a lawyer is like a true partnership so that the attorney isn't just advising on like the tactical legal strategy, but can actually understand the business and help you make strategic business decisions. So I think, at the early stages of business development, there are some critical points where talking to a lawyer, I think, can really help offset some pretty substantial risks or really fight some fires before they get started. So I would say the first is, how do you set up your entity? Like, what is the legal structure for your entity? Should it be an LLC? Should it be an S corp? Should it be some other kind of entity? Those sorts of questions a lawyer can dig in and help you give advice. There's some consequences if you don't do it quite right or the way that you kind of intended. There could be tax complications for those issues. So I know a lot of us feel like it's easy just to jump on to like one of those online tools and get
Mhm.
some formation documentation, do it ourselves, and that's totally fair. But I think, and my advice I often say is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That just taking a moment and engaging a lawyer to make sure you're setting up your entity correctly can really, really, I think, save some challenges down the road. And I think there are two other things that go into play with just that first stage sort of organizational setup. The other one is who's owning and controlling the entity. So I think a
Mm.
lot of us who are, entrepreneurs have an idea and want to do a startup, or maybe perpetual entrepreneurs. Maybe we do that with a good friend or a business partner, a family member. And at the beginning, things are rosy, it feels great, everybody's happy. But if the organization structure for the entity isn't quite set up in a way that is clear and that can be addressed openly and with visibility by everybody, when things sort of get more challenging or the rubber hits the road, it's really good to make sure that you've had legal advice with respect to who's in control, who owns what, who gets to make the decisions, what decisions they get to make. And so I think those are just really great use of time for a lawyer conversation. And I think the other part of it for this first bucket is where do you incorporate? So where are you doing business? Where do you want to do business? There benefits for incorporating in places like Delaware or places like Arizona or Texas? So I think those three buckets sort of fit into that first category of corporate formation and entity. And then I would say the second, do you have any questions about that one, or should I
No, this
move in?
that honestly, I wish I knew you when I when I formed a couple of my companies because girl, you would have saved me so much heartache and money and everything. So I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely, it's worth it to, you might be thinking, "Oh, it's free if I just do it myself." It's worth it to have an attorney, like Cami said, to really represent you when you form your business. Cami, would it be good? So, say you've already got a business that's formed, it's been around. Is it worth it to be like, "Hey, I'm gonna have a formation check. I'm gonna check my corp articles of incorporation. Do I have an operating agreement? Am I in good standing, right? Is it worth it for a business owner when they first meet, when they start a new relationship with an attorney? Is that a worthwhile check?
Well, I think it depends sort of on the nature of the engagement. So, somebody might involve an attorney for like a business conflict, and I think as a result, the issues that you're referring to may come up, like in the litigation. But
Mhm.
if you are engaging an attorney to help give you advice about the business and growing the business or modifying the business, I do think those conversations end up sort of happening even naturally, even if they not
Sure.
are intended. So yeah, I do think it's good to make sure your lawyer understands the setup and the structure and all the things and can help advise you to make some twists or tweaks here and there.
Yeah. Because we did that too, right? When I first met you, that was one of my objectives. I had a part of my company formed in Texas because that's where my out of state counsel was. And a part of it was in Arizona. It was all total mess, like I am half of the time. And your team, really helped to get it all organized. And it was actually a more complex process than I thought it would be. And so I was grateful to have their support, to really streamline it. And now it's like nice and perfect and clean. It's been that way for like 10 years or something. So
Oh, good.
yeah, that's good. Yeah. All right.
Let's
So you
hear that.
said that was one, right? That
That
was
was one
formation.
category.
That was one category. So we got two more. Okay.
The second one is employment issues. So, in
Oh, big one.
specifically classification. So, at the earliest stage of many folks' business journeys, it's a hard conversation about who to bring in to help you do what. right? So a lot of business owners are potentially really good idea generators. They're really good, but they might not necessarily be the best IT people or the best marketing people. And so they often will think about working with other parties to help support the business. And often I've seen employers can get into a really big sticky wicket by what we call misclassifying folks. So when I say misclassify, I mean that you bring somebody on as an independent contractor instead of as an employee. And if
Mm.
the person is not brought on properly, that means there could be some exposure related to failure to have paid specific taxes, to provide workers' compensation insurance, to provide certain benefits, to potentially pay all of their wages and to track their time. So it's just really important, I think, if there's any question about whether or not a person is an employer or an independent contractor, that is a very wonderful use of resources and time to get a lawyer to help guide a business owner through those kinds of decisions.
That's a great one. And anything employment related, I think, is really great to get. I think of it as training, to be honest. Like,
Yeah,
there's so many preconceived notions about how you can treat an employee. How do you talk to them? What do you do? And like just getting a little bit of training to be like, hey, have a company handbook, have good, well documented policies, have some, be aware of certain things. And again, like I said, you've definitely trained me. Like some stuff I didn't even know with the Americans with Disabilities Act that affects me as a business owner when I have employees that give me notice that they have an issue, a disability or an addiction, even that I wasn't even aware of. And so it was, I remember our first conversation. I was like, what? But that's the whole point, right? So that you're armed and equipped with knowledge to make better business decisions. And it
absolutely.
ended up being good, right? It ended up being just fine.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks, and to your point about just talking to a lawyer about employment issues, I think that becomes more and more relevant as a business grows. So
Mhm.
specifically, if you're at 5 employees or 15 employees, depending on the state that you're in, certain laws and statutes could start to get triggered. So the
That's true.
ADA that you just described with the Americans with Disabilities Act, that gets triggered with 15 employees. Other federal laws get triggered, when you bring in that 15th person. So those are the kinds of questions, though, you can ask sort of early on so that you can be prepared. And like, and a business owner can know, all right, I'm getting ready to add employee number 15. That means I need to take a look at this policy and this policy, maybe add this, maybe have a handbook, like those sorts of things. But
Sure.
it's easy. It's better to do that proactively than reactively, especially when it comes time to like track things and have processes in place.
100%. And honestly, guys, it's not as hard as you think, especially when you have a really great lawyer. Like I said, with Cami, it was a few conversations, and I was in the middle of a matter. I had an employee that had an addiction, and they weren't performing, and it had created some liabilities for me, some exposure. And luckily, it was like no issue. I was able to handle everything just fine. But in that experience, what I realized is, hey, wait, I didn't have an employee handbook. I didn't have a written policy about employee conduct. What is considered appropriate conduct. I didn't have any of that. And even though I was at the time, I was sort of smallish. What you don't want to do is like not have those things so that you can be like a professionally run versus a mom and pop, company. And then get into a situation where someone's like, oh, they didn't accommodate me, or oh, they discriminated against me, or hey, they, separated me because I fit some category, right? I have an alphabet soup or whatever it is, right? And you just don't want to be that way. And I'm sure that none of us, are separating our employees or, letting them go for any of those reasons. But, what Cami helped me to learn is, and what I realized is that, when someone's not performing well and you want to be like, you know what, I'm telling you to kick some rocks, right? That if you don't pay attention, that, maybe you didn't communicate with them and they might say, oh, you're telling me to kick rocks because I'm over 50. I think it's over 45 because I'm over 45, or because I'm a woman, because I'm a man, because I'm a certain color, because I like a certain type of person, or because I have certain pronouns. There's a lot of stuff out there that people are like, oh my gosh, right? This is why you're discriminating against me. And it may have nothing to do with your decision, But if you don't have a good policy and it's documented and it's in writing and you've taken a little time to share that with all of your employees as they come and go, then it's easier for people to accuse you of certain things. So I think of it as a preventative measure, and really more of, as a leader, you want to give clear guidance and to establish your values and your virtues as a business. And so that employee handbook, which when Cami first proposed it to me, I was like, what? Employee handbook? And then I thought, then when she shared it with, she actually had one, because some of the stuff is like, it's built on best practices. So she was like, here's an example. And I was like, wow. And then it just made my mind go, wow, right? Now I can say, here, this is what good conduct is. This is what's unacceptable. Don't be in the office cussing people out, right? Right? Don't show up at work with your booty cheeks out. And it's like some of this stuff you would think would be obvious, but baby, in these days, it's not. And so some of these things are just, I won't say simple, but they're very straightforward business practices that are very well enabled by an attorney, especially one like Cami that's focused on businesses, and they can just help you do it not only faster but just easier. And for me, what that employee handbook turned into is it turned into my code of conduct for myself, my staff, all my managers. It became a really easy thing for me to talk to them about our how we conduct ourselves in our company. And yeah, it was great. So actually I'm sidetracking, girl.
No,
So keep going. Yeah.
I think it's great. I mean, just to comment a little bit on that, if you'll permit me, I
Please.
think what a lot of business owners need to start thinking about, which might not be totally familiar to them, is identifying and mitigating risks.
Correct.
And a lot of, like, there's definitely legal risks that businesses face, but there's different kinds of risks too, reputational risks, financial risks. But that what a lawyer can do is really help a business owner identify what those risks are and then come up with a strategy to help bring them into a more manageable place. And so
Yeah.
an employee handbook is a great tool to help reduce risk associated with employment related issues or conflicts that come up in the workplace.
Yeah.
It's really about having transparency about expectations. And like you said, codes of conduct are awesome tools, but it also just helps a lot of, like, the extension of the owner into the business, right? So I think a lot of times, like, you bring people in, you empower them to be managers, they're managing people. And then how do we ensure that the managers are doing what we expect of them? Well, the handbook is a great tool to make sure that that communication is happening and the education is, trickling into the biz. So I think
Yeah. I love
obviously I'm
that.
a big fan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And look, folks, I'm going to take this to a whole nother level, right? Because what Cami is saying is not only 1,000% right, but I want you guys to think about it in the context of this social media enabled world that we live in today. So, you might have employees that have your logo on their t-shirt and they're out there twerking in the camera, right? We've seen a lot of that. We've seen a bunch of it on TikTok and, other platforms. Or you might have, an employee that has, certain that identifies in a certain way, and maybe they're conducting themselves in a way that is not in keeping with your company's policies. And they also identify in a certain way, which you don't mind. You don't have any issue with their identity, but you do have an issue with them slapping your customer or cussing them out or whatever it is they might have done that does not comply with your company's policies. If you don't have a published, stated employee handbook, when I say published, I don't mean like published on the internet, but I mean, you've provided it to your employees. For our business, we actually send it to our employees via DocuSign, where they just need to acknowledge. They don't have to say, "Oh, I agree," but they just need to say, "Yes, I'm telling you that I've received this," and then it's voluntary on their part if they're going to follow it or not. But we're really explicit that, hey, this is our required code of conduct. And if you choose not to follow it, then you may be terminated because this is our requirement. So why is that important? It's so important if you have an employee that's out there and they're in a protected class, and I'll let Cami describe what those are. or they're in a class of an identity or a group of people, and then that baby is changing every day, right? But they're in a group that might say, "Oh, hey, I'm in this group of identify in a certain way," and then you have to let them go because their conduct is not in keeping with your company. If you have an employee handbook and they say, "Oh, they discriminate against me," then you can say, "Hey, on page 13 in my employee handbook, this is our policy and this person violated it." And so you have a much better stance to say, "Hey, here's why I separated this employee. It's not because of how they identify, it's because they didn't follow our conduct." If you don't have an employee handbook, it's harder to have that, make that statement and have people believe you. And what Crammy was saying is like so huge. No, you might not get sued. You might, but what you might be concerned about is getting canceled, right? And like this is real talk in today's world. Is that someone might say, "Oh, they're anti whatever, right? Anti minority group or anti identity or anti whatever." I'm trying not to use hot buttons, not because I don't care about them, because it's not the point. The point is you want everyone to know that you are a fair and equal opportunity employer and that you treat all your employees equally and according to your company policies. And if you don't have established, documented company policies that you take just a few minutes as part of your onboarding process to have employees acknowledge you, say, "Hey, here's our company handbook." If you don't do that, then it's harder for you to establish that you're not discriminating and that you're not taking actions based on somebody's identity or how they dressed or, what pronouns they would like you to refer them as. And that's really what's important. For me personally, I feel like that is actually the greatest benefit of getting trained. And I would say training, and Kemi might think of it differently. Lawyers say get advice, but I honestly would encourage you to find a really great attorney like Kemi and get trained, right? What are some tips and tricks? Have an employee handbook, make sure it complies with all the good laws. And that's why you want an attorney to guide you with that, because you don't want to pull some old janky stuff out there. And then get trained so it's in your toolkit. Like how you know how to drive a car, now you know how to drive and navigate through these days where you have to be really mindful to create an environment that's inclusive and respectful for all people, but also to create a code of conduct that your employees know of what you want from them, and when they don't comply with that, to be in a position where you can deal with their performance and, if necessary, remove them from service without any issues. So that's the big one. Don't get canceled because y'all couldn't take no employee handbook, right? All right, so we did 1 and 2. Do you have any more to add about number 2?
Well, just that, the handbooks should reflect the law. So just like you were mentioning, there's laws, federal laws and laws in every state that protect people from employment related discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. And what you're referring to are what are called protected classes. So the law protects folks who fall within those categories from being discriminated, retaliated, or harassed based on those characteristics. So some of the categories include age. And so typically it's 40 years old or older, race, color, religion, creed, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, the status of being pregnant, veteran status, genetic status. I think that one's really
Oh,
interesting.
interesting.
There's protections against, like, if an employer learns your genetic information, cannot be the reason
Wow.
for employment actions taken against the
Mm-hmm.
employee. So yeah, and so the handbook should reflect what the law says. And so what we are doing is saying we follow the law, and this is the expectation. So for sure.
Wow, I'm so glad you went through that list because folks, the list sometimes gets longer, right? Like
Oh,
they have cases, Supreme Court cases. I thought it was like a few years ago that there was even a case where a woman was of a weight, and I think this is under accommodating someone with a disability, and the woman was like 500 pounds, and she wanted a certain type of a chair, and so there's things you have to be mindful of, and that's why having an attorney is helpful, because the attorney be
yeah,
like, "Baby, you need to add this to your list." you
yeah.
you can't tell Fakisha she can't come to the job no more. You gotta be like, "Come on, girl, it's okay. We got the right outfit for you." And it's like it's just so you're aware. And I mean that
Yeah,
in
and it
all
goes back to
the
the
joy.
comments we were talking about. Like if you decide to go into another state, the state may
Yeah.
have protections for different protected
Oh,
classes
yeah.
that you're
So
not familiar
true.
with. So I know that San Francisco has ordinance related to a person's appearance and to their size. So yeah, it's all state, city, local. It's good to have
Yep.
somebody who knows how to help you navigate.
So good. And I know it might feel like if you're not doing this today and you might feel like, "Oh my gosh." And it sounds like, you might feel like, "Oh, I don't want to get involved in politics." Actually, what I'm saying to you is this is how you don't get involved in politics because your business politics is really doesn't belong in your business unless of course your business is about politics. But if you are a baker or esthetician, a consultant, a marketing agency, politics isn't really usually beneficial to you. And so having a legally compliant employee handbook is such a great way for you to not be political, right? To say, hey, I treat everybody fairly, equally, and here are my legally compliant policies so that I can make sure I have an inclusive, protected environment where there's no harassment, no retaliation, no discrimination. And that's really what it's about.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so number three, I asked you for three. You gave me two juicy, juicy ones. So what's
Yeah,
number
number
three?
three is how to protect. Again, we talked about risks and how business
Yeah,
owners
yeah, yeah,
can
yeah.
identify risks and mitigate those risks and help preserve the company for the future. And a big bucket of risks relates to protecting the company's confidential information
So
and
good. Yes.
intellectual property. So early on, it's I think a really great opportunity to talk to a lawyer about potential patents, copyrights, trade secrets, confidentiality agreements, NDAs, non-disclosures, all the things, so that when you put your beautiful baby that you've created out into the market,
Yeah,
you don't have somebody within your business taking it and running it on their own and putting
so good.
themselves in competition with you. So I think it's just a really great use of time to make sure you're protecting that secret family recipe or that wonderful
Yeah.
invention that you've come up with.
Oh my gosh, Cami, you're a $1 million attorney. Because honestly, no, really, like that is it. That is it. I have a client and they have this really successful business for 30 years. They host these big conferences. But they have been affected by that. Partners that they've worked with that took some of their trade secrets, or other companies that have took some of their supplier relationships or client relationships. And I don't have all the visibility, but it seems to me that they might not have had all those protections that were required to prevent not competition, like you said, right? Non-competes, NDAs, and I know what you've taught me is that sometimes those non-competes aren't necessarily enforceable, and that goes under the non-disclosure of, right? And you actually helped us. When I first met Cam, you guys, my non-disclosure was like, I don't know, a couple paragraphs, right? And I had found it on the internet, and this was decades ago, right? And I found it on the internet, or I stole somebody else's, which that's what you do, right? But then when I met her, she was like, "Baby, we need." Well, Cammie doesn't talk like that, but that's how I remember it, right? She was like, "Baby girl, you need to do a whole thing here." And so we did. She looked at all my formation and my agreements. I said, "Hey, can you look at my contracts?" We did. We got the employee handbook and all that kind of stuff. And it took time and it did cost money, you guys, but it didn't cost as much money as you might think. It wasn't like $50,000 or anything. I think it was like hundreds, maybe low thousands or something. And that was over the course of many engagements and interactions. And lawyers track their time in like minute increment, like 15 minutes or whatever. And honestly, when you have a great attorney like Cami, like you spend 10 minutes and that's all you need. And they're like, yep, yep, yep. Okay, okay. You're right. And you got what you needed. Because I know a lot of us, you got to pinch all your pennies. So I really get that. But I wanted to tell you this finish my story about my NDA. My NDA was like wimpy, 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 right? Not hefty, 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 and she was like, I really think you should rethink this. And so we talked about it, and Cami gave me an NDA that was way more enforceable and more based on current industry, standards and legal standards and stuff like that. And I've had no issues. And the training that I got back, I keep saying training, and that might sound unpleasant to some of you, but I really want to call it that because as business owners, the world is changing faster than it ever has, and the things that we need and the knowledge that we need to really run our businesses successfully without issue and to mitigate that risk that Cami pointed out are becoming more substantial. And so what we need to know is not just how to be great estheticians or, great CPAs or great marketing professionals or great whatever, but we actually need to have, it's helpful when we have more skills on running a business and having partners that are licensed skilled professionals to teach us so that we understand, we learn from them. So back to my NDA. My NDA, baby, it's like pages now. And it covers, it covers me and my partners, me and my clients, what we're going to share, what we aren't going to share, what we can, what we can't, how we're going to handle it if we have a dispute or an issue. And it has been so much more valuable. The other thing that I want to show you guys, because we were talking about, you don't want to get canceled. How does this affect your brand? If you're a small company like mine and then you're dealing with really big companies, I've been honored to work with some of the largest companies in the world, and I still work with them. Um, well, you better believe they got a whole legal team, and they got, their NDA is way better than yours. But what you don't want to do is work with those big companies and you don't have sound business infrastructure, because that's what they're going to require. They're going to require that you are compliant with laws, and they're going to require that you, when you send them your MDA, that it's not going to look laughable, right? Those are things that are going to be important to them and give them an impression of your brand. So if your business documentation is deficient, it'll give them the impression that your company may not be a suitable supplier for them. And back to reasons why you want to engage an attorney, Cammie's 100% right. You want to make sure you protect your assets. But I would say that really goes to giving your large clients the impression that you're a well run, legally compliant, professional organization. Even if it's just you and your cousin Nancy, right? That's okay. But they want to know that you've got a good business foundation with good business documentation. And you're going to get that by working with an attorney and not by just coming up with stuff on your own. So that's really what it is.
Yeah, that's a great
Cool.
point. Love it.
Yay. All right. So next question. So if you have questions and you're watching or you have questions later, hit us up on the chat, change3e.com. We always have people who are monitoring the chat. And of course, if you need a business attorney and you'd like some advice on a really great one, I would always say Cammie's pretty yay. Now there's a process that you need to go through for any attorney, whether it's Cammie or any other, but certainly if you need one or you know someone that would benefit from one, let us know. We would happily make an introduction, and then you guys can go through the process to see if, Cammie would be a great fit for you, or if it's someone else. All right, so now back to it. So my next question is, and you talked about some of it, this in terms of risk, but let's turn it into, a hot topic, which, everybody's using AI. And you can ask AI. I tried to call my AI Fat Keisha, but it was like, we're gonna have a nice environment. So you can call me Keisha, but not fat. It's like, I mean that in a good way. Like some people think that's good. Like pH fat. Um, I'm old. Okay. But and I really did have that conversation with my AI. And it
I
was
believe
so
it.
funny. It was funny. The AI was like, okay, I appreciate it. And I was like, I really just want to personalize you. And they were like, okay. Um, but back to AI. So a lot of us are probably using AI, right? This is the year when like everyone's trying to do it, and they're telling you, big companies like Microsoft and IBM and Google and you name it are like, you got to use it, you need to use it, and if you're not, you're going to not be able to compete. And it does certainly feel like everybody's doing something with
Mm.
AI these days. And AI has been designed to try and give you whatever you want, even if it makes it up. And that's the thing. So if you go to your AI and you say, I got this employee and they're not acting right and I want to let them go, can I just fire them? The AI might make up some stuff, or it might not understand the scenario, or it may not know how to give you proper advice because it's not a lawyer. And so if you are using AI and you think, oh, I can reduce my operating expenses by asking my legal questions to an AI tool. And there are even some AI tools that say they're optimized for legal. questions, I think it's like Sage Book or something like that. I would strongly encourage you to reconsider that. So, Cami, talk to us about that. What's the risk to a
Yeah.
business owner if they're lawyers and AI
So
agent?
I can't, opine about specific companies, tools, whatever. So I'm going to just talk very broadly about using these large language models or these agentic AI tools to help you sort of answer your legal questions. I will say, I've seen it show up in my practice where HR folks within moderate sized organizations are turning to AI to answer questions that they normally would turn to us to answer, and having to
Here.
sort of unravel some of that and help do it a little bit better. I've seen opposing parties or so former employees who have claims. I can tell their demand letter has been written by AI. So it's
Yes.
definitely happening. People are definitely using the tools on, all sides. But in my opinion, I think there's some really significant risks that I would say proceed with caution. I'm a big fan of tools. I just want to say this to start. Like AI tool, yard tool, it doesn't matter. I love a good tool because a good tool makes a very challenging job much easier to do. So please hear, I think AI can be extremely helpful, but we just got to do it with eyes wide open and do it with real good intention. And I think the first risk is what you've already identified, is that they like to make stuff up, right? Like they call it hallucinating. AI is
Yep.
sort of notorious. Those large language models are sort of notorious for kind of just taking what they've learned and creating something
Making stuff
new.
up. Yep.
And that isn't always accurate. And so to rely on what an AI has said related to legal advice can be quite problematic. We've actually seen there's a lot of cases that lawyers themselves have been relying on AI in their briefs that they file with courts, and the AI will make up like citations to cases that never existed. And the lawyer didn't check to make sure that the case actually existed. So it's just, we're all learning how these tools can just be false in what they do. So the best, most accurate strategy would be to go to a lawyer who's competent in the field and to help give them information so they can give you advice. I would say the second really significant risk I would be concerned about is losing rights to my intellectual property if I was using one of these
Mm.
tools. And so, as hopefully your audience all knows, these AI, these large language models, these agentic tools, they learn from the data that we put into them. And so, as a result, the data that you may put into it could be pulled out by another user
Somebody
and
else.
made available to them. And there are obviously ways to sort of lock down permissions and ask the tool, depending on the tool, not to learn, not to train on your data. But I think the only way to be totally confident that your data is not going to be trained is not to put it into the tool.
For sure. Yes.
So I laugh, but
So
sadly,
true.
there's some like legendary horror stories that are out there where like large technology companies had engineering teams put algorithms and code into these tools in order to try to help see some of the flaws, and as a result they gave away the secret sauce, and
Yeah.
that information is now for anyone to be able to pull out.
Yep.
So I would just say if you use a tool, just be really mindful of not putting confidential information into it. So you know first and last names of employees, confidential information about financials, business decisions, legal advice. We wouldn't want this to go into, legal advice to go into one of these tools. So just I would say, be really mindful.
That's such a great, oh my gosh. I didn't even consider any of that. Now, there are companies who talk about this kind of stuff like Microsoft, their AI tool actually says, oh, hey, we won't put your information in the global model. And it's really, they talk a lot about security and compliance. And I'm sure others will try to follow suit. But either way, you bring up a great point, is that whatever you put in it is in it, right? They say the internet is forever, which is for the most part true. So if you're in a legal matter, you definitely don't want to be putting that kind of stuff in there because your opposing counsel could potentially gain access to some of that. Possibly, who knows the way some of this works. And it's all about making sure that you are, really clear and you're working with, like Cami said, confidential sources like your attorney, where all that attorney client privilege is going to be really protected. Hopefully, none of us are going to be in legal matters for our business or otherwise. But a great way to make sure we don't is, here's another thing. And one of my clients is a leadership coach, and so there's a lot of AI led coaching, leadership coaching tools out there. A lot of companies use that, and so you might be, talking to an agentic AI for leadership advice, right? How do you manage your staff? How do you inspire them? How do you, give them feedback or what have you? But here's something that you might not have thought about, and back to AI tools and what you put into them. Maybe you got an issue with somebody, maybe you don't like the way their dreadlocks look or their accent or the way they talk, or, maybe you've got some issues or whatever. And again, whatever you put into the AI is in the AI. And so you've got to be mindful about that kind of stuff too. I would classify that as a risk as well of, um, your most confidential concerns, queries, thoughts, uncertainties, questions, those things would be best handled and protected by a licensed professional or a professional. That's their role. They're there to hear your questions or your concerns or issues and advise you in a really private, really truly protected manner. And an attorney, I think that's probably the most protected relationship, would you say, right? That attorney client is like super protected, Cami?
Well, I love that terminology, super protected. I love it because it's we have a fiduciary duty, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
incredibly important part of the attorney-client relationship is that we preserve the confidentiality of our conversations. And so, um, I don't believe that an AI bot can do that and doesn't have that
No.
fiduciary relationship
Right.
with folks. And so, that's I think what makes the attorney client relationship potentially quite successful is that clients can be candid and tell the truth so that the attorney can have the full picture about what's going on in order to best advise the right strategy. And
Mm-hmm.
it's if you're pulling punches, not sharing information with the bot because you don't want to tell the truth, it's just going to compromise the
Giving you
outcome, and
information.
it's kind of
So
going to be
right.
a challenge. I
Yeah.
think
So let's
another.
double click on that. Yeah.
Oh
Oh,
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead.
Please. No,
No,
I
go
was gonna
ahead.
say let's double click on that, right? So guys, let's double click on that because right, the whole point of this growing happily is so that you can grow happily, right? Not grow with issues or grow tired. Is so you can really have smooth operations. Your business is going great. And so what Cami just talked about, that whole attorney-client privilege is literally like that's kind of bedrock legally, right? There's like all kind of cases, and it's a highly protected concept, the relationship between an attorney and their client. And what does that mean? That means you have to be their client. It can't be like the attorney you called up and say, yo, what's up? I got some questions. That's why as it's not as quick to hire an attorney. You can't be like, oh, I like you. Can you be my attorney? They actually have to go through what they call a conflict check, right?
Yep.
Make sure that they can represent you without conflicts and all this sort of stuff. And it doesn't take like 10 years or anything. It takes like a few days or yeah, right. So it's really not hard, but it is such an important um it's such an important relationship that it is something that you have to set it up just right. But
Yeah.
once you have it, right? Once you have it, then there's so much protection for you in that relationship. It is though your attorney is like one of the few places is, you and God, you and your lawyer, right? Where you can just say whatever and you can be like, oh my gosh, right? And they might judge you, but you won't know it, right? But they're not gonna, it's not going to come to haunt you or whatever. And if they do violate that, it's not good for them. It's like it could lead to them not even being able to be attorney anymore. It's like really serious. So this is the one place for you as a business owner where you could go and literally just say whatever. Now some of you might be thinking, I don't do anything wrong. I don't have anything that I need to hide. Of course not. But I'm sure there are things that might be going on in your business or with a supplier, or you're in a situation with a client or whatever, where you have some real concerns and you're like, I don't know if I could do this. I'm not certain that the client wants me to do this, but I don't know if that's right. And you certainly don't want to put those kind of questions into any sort of a scenario where it could be exposed to the public, right? Or maybe here's some scenarios, and I've had clients go through this. A supplier, a client wants a type of relationship with you that you don't. And I'm not talking about a business relationship. Maybe you real fine, baby, whatever you identify as, but you fine. And so they're like, oh, let's go to dinner. Let me take you out, and they're treating you in a way that's making you uncomfortable. Maybe it's not professional. And so that's a situation where an attorney would be so valuable to say, oh my gosh, I'm in this situation. I'm getting a bit uncomfortable. What would you recommend? How do I handle myself? What's your recommendation? And again, in a scenario like that, you'd want so much utter confidentiality where you can feel really safe and protected, and someone who's knowledgeable, understanding, and also has that power, as an attorney to advise you to say, hey, here's some things I would recommend you do. Here's what I've seen. Here's how you can address that. Here's what you can do to protect yourself or to ensure there's no issues. Because remember, we talk about no harassment, no discrimination, no retaliation. And so think about it. There's probably 25 other situations that aren't you doing something wrong, but it might be a gray area where you're feeling uncomfortable and you really need some advice. That is not where you want an AI bot to try to help soothe you and secure you and help you know what is the right thing to do. That's where you want a really seasoned, experienced attorney to help you.
And I think it's a great time for me to do my typical disclaimer because we're talking about professional responsibility. So this conversation that we're having, it's not attorney-client privileged. I'm not anybody's lawyer in this conversation, and nobody should rely on legal advice in this conversation. So I think these are just good ideas, good suggestions, but there's nuances to everything. And so even the scope of the attorney-client privilege, there's nuances. And so, I think if you're concerned about whether what you're saying to your lawyer will be confidential, you should ask your lawyer. And that, it depends on the nature of the disclosure, depends on the state you're in. So there's lots of different things that can go into play there. So I think that's absolutely true, though. But we know those nuances don't exist with AI. That's not what they are designed to do, right? Like, again, I love a
Right.
good tool, but this is
Yeah.
not what AI was designed to do. They're
Right.
designed to take these low level work things that we do and do them faster and do them more efficiently. They're not
Yeah.
designed to give folks complex, thoughtful, cogent, strategic legal advice.
Yay! Awesome, awesome. All right, guys. Well, we're getting to the last part of our conversation. Cami, you are amazing. I hope you guys can see from this conversation. I know a lot of folks are like, oh, I have a lawyer. I don't need a lawyer. What's the purpose of a lawyer? But for me, it was so important to have this discussion because I deal with hundreds of small and mid-sized business owners and leaders on a regular basis. And what I find is a lot of them have worked with an attorney, but I often find that they don't often partner with an attorney. And I understand it. I empathize. It's a challenge for me too. There are not enough hours in the day. And lawyers are not the least affordable. They are not the
Yes.
lowest cost resource. Okay. I get it, especially an award-winning attorney, right? Where you're like, oh my gosh, right? I get it. Wouldn't it be great? And honestly, sometimes you're like, I need to change my profession. I'm gonna go to school for like 14,000 years, and I'm gonna get all the degrees, and I'm gonna do all this stuff, and I'm gonna go be a lawyer because this is more, this is better, right? I get it. But like I said, there's a reason why they charge for their time in 15-minute or even 5-minute blocks
Six.
because they are 6 minutes. All right, 6 minutes because they are so good, right? They really are. This is what they do, and they know how to do it really well. And so it's worth it to have that support. I mean, that's just the truth of it. And I want you guys to think about it, whatever you're thinking about it. If you're not on this camp of, hey, having a business attorney, not your cousin Larry, not the dude not the ambulance chaser, not the guy with the billboard, not those. Nope, nope, nope. Right. You want the back office business attorney. This is what they do. They're focused on the business regs. They know what all the business requirements are. This is what they do every day. That's the attorney you want. When you find that attorney, really partner with them and figure out what's your cadence. I get it. You got a budget, what you can afford or not. Figure that out. And like Kimmy said, you talk to him, you ask him, hey, look, I only got a few $100s every now and then. Like, can you work with me? And they'll tell you yeah or no.
Exactly. And I think having that conversation at the beginning is so key. So, like, what is your budget? And staying within the budget, negotiating those things so it doesn't become a burden on the business to have that legal
Yeah.
support. But I also think if you're lucky and the lawyer is lucky, creating that relationship early on in the business, the lawyer can grow with you. So as you get more and more complex issues, the lawyer can help the business navigate those issues. And that's maybe when the dollars start to get a little bit bigger, but there doesn't have to be a huge outlay of expense at the beginning. Like you said, if you get a good lawyer who understands what they're doing, they can be efficient with it and help direct you in the right way. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's very self-serving because I'm a lawyer, but I definitely think, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have folks come to me and it's like, gee, I wish you would have talked to a lawyer, because this, like, $100,000 lawsuit we could have resolved for a lot
Well,
less
for
money. So
$2,000, yeah,
yeah.
for sure. And that honestly, Cami, what you just said is why I really wanted to have this discussion and why I want it to be in my series. And we're going to add this to our podcast, which we're going to launch in January. Yay. Because it's something that I feel like business owners often overlook. They think about, how do I market my business and how do I sell my stuff and how do I make my product or my service really cool? And I've got all these ideas, and how do I do this? And how do I hype it? Like, there are people telling you all that stuff all the time. And you hear it all the time. Oh, do ads, do this, do video, do that, right? And there's so many stuff. And that's all the fun, awesome stuff. But here's what I've learned, and I've been doing this for about 30 years. I know you don't believe me because I know I only look about 22. But, that's my
Age
joke.
is just a number.
Right? But literally, right, in my 30-year career, what I found is when the rubber really meets the road is generally where the lawyers are involved. In my largest customers, they all have legal departments where they have a few attorneys, and that's all they do all day. And they're looking at different things. And a lot of times it's not even like, people don't necessarily go, oh, I can't wait to talk to legal, right? It's usually not like that.
Why not?
But right. And the lawyers are almost always awesome, right? Like Cami. But the thing is and I don't know if you remember this, but when I first met her, I was in the middle of a matter, like I had a personal matter and I had a professional matter, and I had this out of state attorney who wasn't supporting me. He was trying, but it just, because he was out of state, it wasn't working great. And I'd asked somebody, the president of a board of a major charity that I was on the board of directors with, and he was like well regarded. And I was like, hey, could you recommend an attorney? And he was like, oh yeah, this one right here, right? And I remember I first met you in Phoenix, and I think we had drinks or something, or I think beverages, because it was like 4 o'clock or whatever. And I remember I said, I really need I need a mean sharky
Oh
attorney that's
yeah.
gonna go eat everybody, right? And she's all, you can see her, Kemi's all beautiful, and she had her cute little outfit, and she was all, she looked all cute. And she was like, you don't need a mean attorney, you just need a good attorney. And I was blown away. And that was like 15 years ago. Our journey, you've been such a great legal advisor. Cami had to leave me because she went corporate, y'all. So only reason, because
Stop telling our business. Stop telling our business.
sorry. But I was like, no, right. Okay. Sorry. Okay. But either way, the point is that that stayed with me this whole time, because I thought to myself, she's 100% right. Like, you don't need to be mean. You don't need to be forceful. You don't need to be sharky. They have all those great lawyer shows where it's like the sharky dude and they're doing the funny stuff or whatever. And you don't need any of that. You just need a good lawyer. And that's the truth of my experience working with Cami and me running my businesses, is that having that training, having that advisory, and having that support has been really transformational for me to make better decisions. Now, look, I'm definitely not, you fall off the wagon every now and then, you guys, right? So you can still have an A team and make B moves. It happens. But when you do have an A team and you're trying to really get it together, it's so helpful when you've got somebody you can really turn to. So that's why I wanted to have today's conversation. I have one more question, but I wanted to just double click on that, people, because you might be thinking that you didn't really need the support of a really great attorney, but I'll tell you, it is worth it every time. There's never been a situation in my 30-year career where I really needed some legal advice or the support of an attorney, or I was in a situation where I didn't know what to do. And my dealings with a really great attorney didn't benefit me. So I'll say it that way, especially this one. Okay, so now last point. Out of my last of three questions is, and here we go, and I teed it up. What are the most common areas where small business owners get dragged into litigation, excluding debt servicing? So, what are those common situations where they get sued and they have to figure out what to do?
Yeah, I think, depending on the industry, potentially disputes with clients or vendors. But I would say across industry, I would say the most common that I see, obviously, are employment related claims. So
Yeah.
wage claims, discrimination claims, failure to pay certain benefits, failure, workers' comp related issues. All of
Mm-hmm.
these things are very, very common. I think another thing I'm seeing, especially right now, there's a lot of disputes related to employees taking information and running across
Oh,
the street
interesting.
and trying to
Mm-hmm.
start their own business from the employer. And those are situations where, again, I think, gee, I really wish we had this conversation before you're in the position
Mm-hmm.
of trying to enforce this agreement, because here's some of the weaknesses that we're seeing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's, in those cases, the employer might decide it wants to pursue the claims against the
Yeah.
employees. So there's, employers can be in the defense or on the offense, depending on sort of the nature of the dispute. But I would say those are the biggest ones. And those are all usually very avoidable with some good strategic thought and assistance for a good lawyer who knows that they're competent, they know what they're doing, they understand the area, they're licensed in your jurisdiction. Those are all really important things. And for those of you that are thinking about, like, how do I find one of those people? So I would say, if you know a lawyer, even if they don't do what you want them to do, ask them if you think they're good at what they do, ask them to refer you to a lawyer who does do what you need. Because my fundamental belief is good lawyers refer to other good lawyers. So you get into sort of a network of folks that can be, and when I say good, so they're good at what they do, they're ethical, they're responsive, they don't take advantage of clients, they don't abuse the judicial system, they help solve problems, they help coach and guide towards resolution in a positive way. So usually good lawyers can help find other good lawyers.
Great advice. Great answer. Yay. Well, guys, we're almost done for today. I want to thank you guys for joining me. I want to really thank you, Cami, for
Oh,
joining me today.
this has been such a joy, Nico. Like, of
Yay.
course, I always love any moment I get to spend with you. Our trip down memory
Yay.
lane has been really fun. The fact that we get to
Yeah.
support entrepreneurs, super amazing. So thank you very much for including me in this process.
You are so very welcome. I'm sure we're going to talk again. For everyone who's watching and everyone who will watch, because the internet is forever. If you have any questions or you want some advice or you want to find a good lawyer to help you find a good lawyer, well, I can connect you to this good lawyer, or and she's part of a really huge firm, and they've got like incredible attorneys. I think you said in most states. So and as she mentioned, if you're in Arizona, it's really great to have an attorney in Arizona. And I can speak for that. If you're in Hawaii, it would be good to have your attorney be in Hawaii. But what I found is a local lawyer that's just like one person is really helpful. But for me, my strategy, and it started when I met Cami, was I chose a firm. And yeah, the attorneys might be like way more expensive, but it comes with a bunch of benefit, because what I found is that it was like a whole collection of really incredible attorneys. So if I said, hey, can you help me with this, my estate, or can you help me with this tax issue, or can you help me with that? They could advise, right, and connect you with someone who was really specialized in doing that. I think I formed a company. I did a trademark search. I did all kind of things that, might not be in Cammie's wheelhouse, but, was able to get access to people to help me with that. And they were able to do it affordably and really well. And so a firm is really great. A lot of times small business owners don't think, oh, maybe I can't afford it. And it'll depend on the firm and the attorney you meet and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, if you do that proactively, when you have no issues at all, nobody's suing you, you're not going to get arrested, you're not in jail, you got the bail hearing, you don't have any of that. and it's all good. Everything is rosy. Then the attorney might pity you and be like, "Oh, yeah, okay, I'll work with you," and it's just a small retainer or whatever, and it's super affordable, and you can get in there. But if you're like, "Yeah, my ex-wife, I punched her in the head, and then she fell down the steps, and now I got to go to court," that's a whole nother type of scenario, right? And we've seen, like
Don't
the
do
Lincoln
that.
lawyer, were right.
Yeah, just that's not even legal advice. That's just human advice. Just don't do that. Yeah.
Don't do that. Number one. But number two, if you do have a matter, that's the point. And I'm making light of it. But if you are in a situation where you have a matter, you might have broke a law, or you have a claim, or employees trying to sue you, or whatever it is. It can be big or small, but if you have a situation like that, and that's the time that you're meeting a lawyer, well, they're going to want a retainer that will cover that matter. And so then it could be a really big investment. And I've seen them, I've talked to clients 10,000, 15,000, 100,000, right? It might be a really big investment at that point. And so that's really this whole conversation, I hope, is impressed upon you. But for me, that's the number one reason why you should get a really great business attorney that you can partner with and that you like, and they're awesome now before you have any issues, because then it's really easy to start the relationship and you can build that relationship with trust. And if you do run into any little stumbles, it becomes much more affordable. And like Kimmy said, they're going to negotiate with you and they'll be in a place where they would be comfortable doing it. But if they meet you when you're in the middle of a problem, well, then it's probably going to be really costly. So don't run into problems, right? Get good at legal advice up front from a human, a trained,
Yes.
licensed human, and it'll probably avoid any issues that you could possibly have. Not, of course, you might have issues, especially if you're a bonehead like me, but but certainly it'll help minimize it. So, guys, next in December next month, our conversation is about another type of licensed professional that'll really benefit your business, and that is a certified public accountant, a CPA.
Yes.
Yay, right? The dream team, honestly, for any business, the dream team is a really great lawyer that you just love and they're great and you partner with them and you want to call them. Not that you're like, oh man, I got to call Stan, right? But you like look forward to it. A lawyer and a CPA, and together, oh my gosh, it's really magical. When you're really, really small, the two of them can seem very expensive. And so you got to really manage your time and find the right people and figure out how you're going to use them. And so we gave you some good advice on how to do that today with a lawyer. And what we're going to do next month is talk about how to do that with a CPA. There's lots of really great CPAs out there. I've got an IRS professional, so I got the one side, and then I got a CPA. Boop, boop. Both of them are really awesome. But the conversation is going to be, how is it, to CPA or not? To be or not to be, to CPA or to not. And it's really about like, why should you get a CPA? Oh my gosh, there's so many reasons. And we're going to talk about it next month. So guys, thank you so much for joining me on Growing Happily. Thank you, Cammie, for joining me.
Thank
Have a great
you.
day. Grow
Bye.
happily. Bye, everybody.